MultiGreen, building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily real estate through impact investing.
Welcome to the MultiGreen podcast. I'm your host, Randy Norton, and today we'll be speaking with Utah's 21st Attorney General, Sean Reyes. Sean and his staff have re-energized and recaptured the trust of the state with striking leadership, innovative programs, and historic wins against drug dealers, human traffickers, child predators, and white-collar criminals. During our discussion, Sean dissects the intersectionality between his initiatives and how attainable housing can shift the trajectory of future generations. Enjoy our conversation. Sean Reyes, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Randy, it's a pleasure. It's great to see you again.
Sean, I was in Salt Lake City a few weeks ago, and you were so graciously willing to accept this invitation to be on the podcast. And since that time until now, I've been researching some little stats and facts and figures about your wonderful state. And I just want to share some of them with our listeners. I don't think everybody realizes this, but Utah is one of the only states in the country that maintains a AAA bond rating with all three rating systems. And they've been that way since 1965. That is just absolutely remarkable and great governance on your part. But there's also 6 or 8 or 10 other little facts and figures I want to share. You're number one with the best state economy. You're number one with the best economy. You're number one with the most independent state. You're number one with the best state for GDP growth. You're number one for best economic outlook. You're number one for the best economy. 5 cities that has consistent best performing large cities and small cities in the United States. How does that happen?
And I could add, Randy, a number of other metrics, including we're in the top 5, maybe even top 3 for investment into technology with our Silicon Slopes presence, industrial banks right up there at the top, major financial institutions. I think Goldman Sachs, their second largest presence is here in Utah. So a lot of things that people don't realize, and I'm glad that you attribute some of that to government. I think that we try to play a role in that. Truly, it's really about the people of Utah and the businesses in Utah, and they are the primary reason that we are so successful across a number of metrics. But I do believe that responsible government and good government is part of the successful equation. And whether it's our legislature, our executive branch, including the governor, treasurer, the state auditor, lieutenant governor, myself as the attorney general, or our judicial branch. I mean, all of us work and play a role and a part in that. Our local level leaders are fantastic. And I think that there is a conscientious effort throughout the state to harness the volunteerism, the pioneer spirit, the innovation, all these components to create an environment where it's a great place to live, to raise a family, in which to start a business or grow a business. And shamelessly, if any of you CEOs out there are looking to relocate your headquarters, we've got all sorts of different reasons I think you should consider the great state of Utah. So thank you for highlighting that, right? I didn't know off the top I'd have a chance to tout so many of the strengths of our state. Extremely highly educated, fantastic universities, University of Utah, Brigham Young University, Utah State University, Westminster, many, many, many more. And really the heart of a very generous, kind, hardworking, caring, industrious people. I guess from a perspective, one last thing I'll say again, in government, if we can keep government lean and out of the way of the business sector and the people, and try to catalyze and empower those who are expert in their fields, I think that's the best role for government. And I believe that approach is shared by many of my counterparts. So even though government has a critical role to play, government cannot be, should not be the end all and be all and the answer to everything. If so, usually that means that we don't have the private sector, the NGO space, the education community enough involved. And the best solutions, I don't believe, will come purely from government. So there have to be public-private partnerships. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about that today.
Well, you guys are obviously doing something right in the great state of Utah. What motivated you to become more involved with public service? You know, you're a very successful attorney, businessman, investor, and you have many other things that you could be doing. But specifically, what are the events that led you to become, the Attorney General of the state of Utah?
Well, that's a long story, an odyssey that we probably don't have time to discuss in its in entirety. Before I jump in and answer that, Randy, I do want to mention, because I would be irresponsible not to also acknowledge our federal delegation. Because again, the partnerships aren't just state and local. You have to have federal partners, and we have a tremendous federal delegation when it comes to public servants and in the world of politics, who really try to reflect Utah values. And I just wanted to make sure on record that I didn't get a call from a congressional staffer saying, hey, what about my boss? In terms of me, I have some background of public service. My father's uncle, his godfather, technically his cousin, but they grew up all together and were raised together, and he was as close as an uncle, was the president of the Republic of the Philippines in the 1950s. And so as I grew up, I heard such incredible stories about this great public servant. His name was Ramon Magsaysay. And if you ever had time to look up stories of inspirational leaders for the Philippines, he is one of the great leaders of all their history. I believe the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize for Asia is still named after Uncle Ramon, Monching. It's called the Magsaysay Award. So I heard all these great stories of public service. My dad was an immigrant. He actually escaped a dictatorship. Unfortunately, after his uncle passed away tragically in office in a plane crash, a scant decade later, a particular figure rose to power, and my father opposed him. And because of that, his life was in jeopardy, and came to America to live the American dream and also to escape a totalitarian regime where constitutional rights had been stripped away, martial law and a dictatorship had been imposed. And so my father came and struggled to try to make ends meet here, living the American dream. But it was a sharp contrast to, again, the service of his uncle, and then somebody who cared, it seemed, more about his own interests and his own ambitions than serving the people that he represented. And so hearing those stories, my father always emphasized that we must, as a family, give back however we can and serve, whether that's at a local level, a state or national level, to pay back the debt that we owe this country for taking him in when his own country was not safe. And so my father, who passed away recently, was such a patriot, loved America. Sometimes I felt like he loved America more than some of our friends who were born and raised here, because he had the perspective of living outside and coming and understanding how blessed we are. And he would emphasize to me, Sean, America is great, not because Americans are inherently better than anyone else. And I say this, born, bred, bleeding red, white, and blue. We're not better than anyone else. We're not more deserving of anyone else. But we are so privileged and blessed to live in a system that affords us so many opportunities, so much social mobility, so many liberties that I'm afraid we too often take for granted. And I think some of that also bleeds into the issue that we're going to talk about in terms of housing attainability. And by the way, Randy, before I even get into answering substantive questions about that particular issue, I really need to take my hat off to you and your team, what MultiGreen is doing on many levels, but in particular today to talk about this level with housing attainability is truly, I believe, empowering many more Americans and Utahns, the state I represent, to live the American dream in its fullest. The American dream, as my dad was wont to emphasize and remind us, is no guarantee of success, but it's a guarantee of opportunity and possibilities That guarantee, unfortunately, for far too many people is limited when it comes to housing. And housing is if you will, a gateway to many other potentially positive outcomes or some pretty challenging outcomes for our economy, for our society. So I would say what inspired me most to serve and give up, when I first met you, we were talking about legal issues and business issues, and I loved that. But it was interesting. I had to sit on a dozen nonprofit boards to sort of satisfy my impulse to serve. And now I get to do it every single day of the week. And it's incredible to wake up in the morning and work with dedicated professionals like I have here in the Utah Attorney General's office, people who could make so much more money in the private sector and who could grace the covers of industry magazines, but are here working quietly, unassumingly, without much fanfare, and certainly not enough credit. These great professionals that I work with to protect the people of our state, to protect the natural resources of our state, and to do just good work on behalf of the people of Utah. That is a tremendous thing that's really hard to replicate in the private sector. That said, I do believe there's a time and season for everything. So, I don't know when that'll happen, but I'm also looking forward to re-entering the private sector and being a bridge now that I have some experience on the public service side. Who knows? I could run for office again here or return to the private sector sometime in the future. Not making any announcements, but I think, and I'll emphasize this over and over again, and forgive me if I say it too many times, there has to be more connectivity, synergy between the private sector and the public sector. Government and people in government are tremendous and they have noble impulses, but sometimes in our bubble in government, we start thinking, well, we have to be the answer to everything. And government has resources, no doubt. I'm fond of a saying President Reagan used to have that was, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution. And sometimes when government creates things as a stopgap, it's needed, but oftentimes it's not necessary if we would partner with the private sector and figure out a way as government to empower the private sector and then step aside and let them do what they do best. Certainly drawing boundaries and guardrails around that. But government, we have to have and always remember with a great sense of humility, there are much more qualified people. And because of the way government is structured, it's inherently, I would say, less efficient. And the private sector is built for efficiency. And the free market ought to be a key component in any of these quote unquote government solutions. And if we're not availing ourselves of and harnessing the horsepower of the private sector and the nonprofit sector and the education sector, we're doing ourselves and the people we represent a tremendous disadvantage and disfavor. With all of that said, I sense that we're about to jump into the issue at hand.
Well, I appreciate that perspective and that backdrop to the very conversation we're going to have today, which is on attainable housing. As the Attorney General of the state of Utah, and as you've been traveling the world on so many positive initiatives, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I just want to maybe, before we segue into housing, is there any specific initiatives that you want to throw out there that are relevant, that would give the listeners and me some additional perspective on why you might know something or two about housing?
Sure, Randy. I love to be able to highlight some of the great work that my office has done and that the people of Utah have championed. One of those issues is the fight against human trafficking. And similar to that, the fight against child abuse, whether that's of a physical, mental, psychological nature, the fight against domestic violence. All of those, in my mind, are prisons of some sort. It's bondage. In terms of human trafficking, that might be the most literal manifestation of actual human slavery and bondage, people being sold, men, women, and children as young as babies for illegal adoption, illegal conscription into militias, for sex and sex exploitation. Certainly that's a disproportionate amount but also labor trafficking, forced labor, indentured servitude, organ harvesting. There's a multi-billion-dollar trade in that. And people are forced against their will into these life-threatening, or in some cases, their lives are taken in life-ending situations. And it's horrific. And the people of Utah, I'm so proud, have really stood tall globally in leading out, whether it's NGOs that have started here or other initiatives, laws that are passed, people educating themselves, and businesses, I'm proud to say, have really stepped up. And I could name a dozen of them right now, but again, I want to not forget any of them. So generally, the business community has been amazing, and Utah has taken a lead in those efforts. The fight against the opioid epidemic, which is ravaging America and takes more American lives every year than COVID, than any other measurable category, whether that's car accidents or cancer. People, I don't think, realize the scope and scale of how much of a threat this is, and that's just opiates. And there are many other types of drugs that are threatening. Utah again has taken the lead, and my office has worked to hold people accountable who brought this upon us, but also to find solutions and work with the private sector and to educate and raise awareness across a spectrum of different stakeholders. So those are two issues that immediately come up. Certainly when it comes to law enforcement and making sure that we're more empowered and equipped to do our jobs, we've introduced things like rapid DNA that have taken a 1.5 to 2 year cycle to process rape or murder DNA from suspects down to hours, 24 to 48 hours. That allows us to hone in on the true suspect, the perpetrator, and allow those who are innocent to not be under the cloud of some criminal investigation for years. Training through virtual reality our law enforcement officers to better protect themselves, but also to learn how to de-escalate violence. If they're able to go through a situation and do it dozens or scores of times and learn how to use their voice and not their weapons, learn how to avoid situations, sometimes it's inevitable. Someone pulls a gun on them or someone else and they have to escalate to use deadly force. But we want them so well prepared, and we've created virtual cultural curriculum to help them interact with communities, for example, kids on the spectrum, so the autism community, to make law enforcement safer, better. These are all types of initiatives that we have started here in our office and in Utah. Free legal services for veterans. I could go on and on and on, but all of them in some way or another, and this is the point that I was making with you when you raised attainability. And again, I'm going to say this for your viewers and listeners. I am not the head of housing, human development. I'm not an expert in those areas. I don't purport to be. I'm not here to share a litany of statistics because I don't have them readily at my tongue. But in the areas where I do have some expertise and some experience, I can tell you, I have seen firsthand in my own life growing up, in addition, how accessibility to affordable housing can positively or negatively impact a great state like mine or another country that's struggling. So thank you for giving me a chance to highlight those things. We have one program that I'll finish on called the National Child ID Program that we've resuscitated. It had been on hiatus for several years, but sadly, if children run away or are abducted, and there are hundreds of thousands every year that do in America, then it's my office's duty and responsibility to try to return them back to their families. And we have these simple kits that we send home through schools and through our partners with the sheriffs and the police chiefs that no one will ever have access to, only parents and the families, but to be able to keep a lock of hair, fingerprints, valuable information, so that if heaven forbid a child is abducted or is missing because they've run away or for other reasons, that the parents can share that with law enforcement immediately. And we have incredible Hall of Fame NFL players, coaches, owners, college coaches, Olympians, NBA Hall of Famers, Major League Baseball Hall of Famers, all of whom have come together, NHL, UFC, to help us on this initiative, because this is what America is about. It's about finding solutions to come together, protect each other, regardless of whether you're, one stripe or another politically or religiously, or regardless of the color of your skin or how you to pronounce your last name. None of that really matters when it comes down to the core issues of providing us as all brothers and sisters of the same human family, all Americans, with simple freedoms and liberties, opportunities to protect our families, to make sure kids that are gone, or everything's done to bring them back, that they're given the best educational opportunities and chances to raise the next generation with similar or even better opportunities. All of those, and I can make the link for you and illustrate them. And we probably don't have time, but all of those are affected in some way or another, I believe, by accessibility to affordable housing.
Sean, that's a great segue into what we're talking about today, which is attainable housing. And you have mentioned in the past some perspective that you had growing up. And I think just a couple weeks ago when we were in Salt Lake City together, you shared a very unique personal experience for your upbringing. And I was wondering if you would be willing to share some or part of that today with the listeners.
Sure, Randy. Again, I think for those that don't know me, my dad was an immigrant. My mom was an immigrant, I say too, but she's from Hawaii, which is technically a state of the union, but very different culturally. She was struggling to make ends meet as a public school teacher, and my dad as an immigrant. Together, they raised our family in very humble circumstances in the Los Angeles area. And there were things going on in and around the neighborhood that were tough, gangs, drugs, maybe not optimal circumstances for raising a family. They were terrific, and they were strict, and they were hardworking, and very focused on education. But it became evident from a young age to me how incredibly important it was to be able to have housing attainability. My dad, when he first came to this country, was homeless. He got off a plane because his aunt put him on a plane one way to escape potential execution in his own country for standing up to a dictator. And he gets off the plane not knowing anyone, with no money in his pocket. And where does he go? What does he do? And it would have been great if there were opportunities. He said that there were scant opportunities, not just for a shelter, and those are critical. We're talking about different gradations of need. There's emergency resources that those who are housing challenged can access, but this whole spectrum, a continuum of opportunity to be able to get into, we see, deeply affordable housing, and then into more affordable housing, and work their way up. And I saw that my dad eventually, and my mom, scrimping and scraping, were able to make their way up that continuum. The pride that it gave them to live the American dream. I think my dad, aside from taking the oath of citizenship, never felt more American than when he closed on his first house and felt this sense of ownership, not just of the house, but of being a part of America and belonging, if that makes sense. Psychologically, that was a huge lift for him, a hardworking person who worked, countless jobs to make ends meet and put food on the table and give us shelter and safety and security. And so just in that experience alone, and then seeing the care that they took for it and the pride to protect it and keep it clean and have an asset which was valuable, so that they could leverage to take out loans, to do other things and increase credit worthiness. All of those things became part. Without that, I think people don't understand. Even immigrants who come legally and play by the rules and certainly have opportunities, until they have a home. And I want to be clear, not everybody needs to have a home to feel fulfilled. And I understand why some people don't want to own homes. But for many, becoming American really is completed, or at least is a significant part of that process, is home ownership. I don't know if that was what you were intending for me to share, but certainly having a place that we knew that was ours, that we didn't have to share with others, that we weren't worried about making rent and getting kicked out, or that we would have to move from transitional housing. I saw that with many of my friends growing up, and I think it affected them in ways that they probably still carry with them today. The psychology of, when it comes to children and the trauma that they experience, whether it's identifiable or not, having stability through affordable housing, a place that they can call their own, that's clean and relatively safe, and that they can make their own, is significant to mental and behavioral health. And without it, I think a number of the challenges that we see in society, whether that's addiction or crime or homelessness, and again, I'm not equating any one of those to the other. They sort of have, there's concentric circles and they often overlap.
Sure.
But I think many of those stem from instability that could have been helped by more attainability and more accessibility to homes and houses. That was my personal experience as a child, and that has been validated and borne out even more so in my role. One of the roles is I'm top law enforcement officer of the state, so I see it manifested in not just the crimes that are committed, but dealing with victims of the crimes and also dealing with the perpetrators themselves. I think some of the perpetrators themselves, I know, the statistics show very well that the cycle of abuse, addiction, and law breaking perpetuates itself. And those who were once victims, or may have been when they were children or even in adulthood, often then get sucked into and become those that perpetrate crimes or become the addict. And so certainly I see as from my vantage point as state AG. Now I also represent, my team and I represent every facet of state government. So from that lens, I do get a chance to also see from other state agencies what they're contending with and what they're competing with. Again, addiction, as we grapple with that devastating killer, whether for children or soccer moms, business dads, rural, urban, suburban, it doesn't matter. Housing, I can see, and access to housing can play a significant role in buttressing, again, more stability for families. And I'm going to keep using the word stability because it's the best one that I can think of off the top of my head to equate to why housing accessibility is important. Because if we have more stability, a place where parents can raise their children and have a better shot, a puncher's chance at fighting against everything that's out there, social media and all the threats that are out there, cyberbullying, other crimes, so many other stressors and threats. Having stability, I think, gives families a much better chance. And where there lacks stability, or stability is not as easily attainable, I think it just increases the odds, in some cases exponentially, to see things like crimes of a violent nature, abuse, domestic violence, child abuse. Here's an example. Child abuse alone, because of the transient nature, without stable housing, children are left here and there with different family members or surrogate parents. It's really difficult because abuse can occur and never be reported. Now that happens certainly where the people own homes as well. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't, but the chances just increase. Can I give you? I keep answering questions and giving them myself questions, but can I give you an example, Randy?
Please.
Of an economic impact.
Would love to have that. Yes, please.
That I don't think people are very cognizant of. They think mostly of housing in terms of dollars generated by contractors and builders, and certainly that's a component. So yes, housing can bring and generate and help the economy in that sense. But having a place that, again, that's yours, I'm guessing, because I haven't seen studies on this, I guarantee from my anecdotal experience, helps in terms of being able to have the confidence to go out and get a job, to keep the job, and to be able to complete the job in a way that is much more healthy and constructive. But here's the specific example. Right now, our business is booming up in our resort areas of Utah, where skiing is the best in the world. Sorry, Colorado and other states. We have the best powder anywhere in the United States. Some others in Switzerland might challenge us, but here in the US, we have the best powder. So it's no wonder that our ski resorts are doing tremendously well. Well, here's an interesting byproduct of that success. As the mountains up there draw more and more visitors, homeowners, and things keep expanding, what has been squeezed out, Randy?
Housing.
Affordable housing for longtime generational residents. Now that has a deleterious effect on the fabric of the society. But what is also, who else has also been pushed out are the people who actually work in these resorts and need the affordable housing in order to come and run the hotels and work in the spas and the restaurants and everything else that right now is the boon of that community. It's an entertainment area that is so tourist driven, but they can't find enough housing that's affordable for the very people that are the backbone of that industry. And so you're starting to see a slippage in terms of people that they can retain and hire, people with the skill set that they need, people who are qualified. So what happens when you have unqualified people or not enough people trying to run 5-star and 6-star resorts? Well, things are not attended to the way that they should be in those kinds of environments. And people who are used to that level of service start complaining or start not coming back, or starting to say, well, this isn't as great as I remember it or as it used to be, or maybe I shouldn't buy a house or purchase a membership here. And little by little, it happens over time, sometimes faster than others. You lose the quality of the very things that you're trying to build and promote. And one of the reasons I believe that housing issues aren't as front and center when it comes to policy, politics, is that these issues are generational and they take a long time to create. And the effects and the positive or negative outcomes take a while to see. And unfortunately, in our world, too often we are motivated, especially in politics, to make decisions based on the next election cycle. The incentives for those who are creating policy or regulating are too short term. And if we're talking about 25 years out, 50 years out, or even 10 years out, sometimes that's too much. And people don't want to invest in the long term. But we have to, as responsible stewards, think of not only the time 2 years from now or 4 years from now for the next election, but 10, 20, 50 years out. And if we don't establish those fundamental, foundational opportunities, particularly when it comes to housing, that infrastructure will turn around on us and cannibalize the very thing that we are trying to build in our communities. I see this happen not just in resort areas, but out in rural communities. People love Utah. They fall in love and say, this is so incredible. This is like the Americana that we miss, that our grandparents, that we remember from America, the beautiful. And so they move out and they develop these rural areas and communities. In some senses, that's great. Brings job opportunities, brings other, but unfortunately also happens to raise the housing prices and taxes. And Utah's housing has gone through the roof in the last generation, especially decade. And what happens then again, and this is not, singular to Utah, this happens everywhere around America and even the world. But as we're highlighting the importance of affordable housing or deeply affordable housing, If you want to maintain the very foundation of what draws people to a particular neighborhood, community, county, or area, you can't price out all of the people who built that community over generations and then expect it to remain the way that it was. So what happens? People buy a ton of really expensive vacation homes in this rural community, and then pretty soon the farmers and ranchers and average everyday folks who made it so amazing have to move, can't afford houses that their families have owned for generations. And then it changes the entire fabric of that community. It's a real challenge. So that's, again, economically, I think I could probably go on and on, but I thought maybe that was a good way to illustrate one thing. And when those communities become destabilized because there isn't that continuity, there are so many more challenges. And then things like drugs and addictions and crime and social challenges manifest themselves. Suicidality and ideation of suicide among teens, something that we've battled so much here in Utah. And even though we have tremendous resources like the Safe UT app that allows students and now first responders and military servicemen and women and students at a young age or higher ed to get immediate response back from world-class mental behavioral health therapists. Even with those things in place, it's not enough if we don't have significant and sufficient housing opportunities.
Sean, your perspective is totally invaluable. You've seen all sorts of issues from across the entire spectrum of shelter to rentership to ownership and everything in between. And at MultiGreen, we're focusing on that missing middle and trying to make everyone's life better, step up, and have that entry-level housing experience. Something that you may know, but I wanted to point out, one of the great things about this country is its legal system. One of the great professors at Yale, Robert Schiller, made a statement that said, the two great technologies we have is the capital markets and the legal system. And they're directly connected. And it's guys like you that are enforcing the law and protecting us that allow us to get foreign direct investment and comfortable with communities and redevelopment, putting our capital at risk. Otherwise, this system doesn't work. So thank you for that service. I want to ask one last question and then give you your time back today. Knowing that spectrum of shelter to rentorship to ownership, there's all sorts of attainability levels and opportunities that exist there. What does attainability mean to you? How would you define that?
Wow. It's always challenging when you ask a lawyer to define stuff because, there are a number of different ways. Do you mean metaphysically, existentially, specific to a particular application? Let me go back, Randy. Of all the things that I've discussed, maybe what means the most to me when it comes to attainability, the liberty to live the American dream in its fullest. And it's such a key component to me. I keep using the word stability, but I'm going to return back to it again, because when you attain home ownership at whatever level, it gives you the confidence to start on a road or a journey that you can continue your social mobility if you want. But if you don't and you stop there, you have succeeded. You have accomplished something. You have lived the American dream. And so whether it is a point on your destination or it's a final place that you land and you raise your children there and your grandkids come and visit you there, it is so significantly a part of feeling and belonging to this incredible experiment we call the American Republic. Beyond that, I believe it's a driver for children, maybe second only to having a stable family in terms of parents and a family environment. Having a home gives you the stability, the confidence to potentially overcome certainly to go out and get educated and to do other things, but to overcome mental behavioral health challenges that right now beset our country in a way that we've never seen before. Not when you and I were small, not when our parents were small. Technology has brought us so many benefits and raised our standard of living in many ways, but technology has also enslaved us and entrapped us in so many ways. The very technology sometimes it's supposed to connect us actually isolates us more as human beings and detaches us from real human feeling and contact. While a virtual reality home, I'm sure is helpful and might make you some money on the blockchain or in a meta environment. All technologies that I love and support, there's nothing that really can, to me, replace a brick and mortar place that you call your own, that you call home, where you have a sanctuary to raise your family and teach them whatever values it is that you want to teach them, and instill in them a love of the rule of law and a love for our American system. As imperfect as it is, we are far from perfect. And whenever I speak abroad, I tell those that are hosting me or that I'm visiting, we do not come in a spirit of arrogance. I want to learn from how you all are doing things. America's system is definitely not perfect, but there are some great things that we have. And the reason why so many of us just love America and wouldn't trade it for any other country, and frankly, I wouldn't trade it for any other time in the world, is because we have more opportunity today, perhaps than at any other time in the history of our world, to make a difference in the lives of other people, to help other people, to learn and educate ourselves, and then to go out and use that and lessen suffering and lift our brothers and sisters, whether they're Americans here or abroad or belong to any other nation. And as we see war ravaging the Ukraine immediately as we speak, and we're still trying to help extricate friends and allies from places like Afghanistan, I can't tell you the joy they feel when they come here. And part of it's stability, predictability. But one of the things, the first questions that we have, and I was hosting a world leader just 2 days ago, and they're accepting many refugees. And his first concern is we have to find long-term, stable housing for them, not just transitional camps. We need those in the immediate, but long-term, in order for them to assimilate, in order for them to have a semblance of the life that they left in their former country, they have to have housing. Why is that? For all the reasons we've talked about, and certainly 1,000 other reasons that smarter people can talk about, people more experienced than I. But from my perspective, if you're asking me why attainability is so important, why the work of MultiGreen and their partners, why what you're doing here, Randy, why I took the time to pull away from some other, global dignitaries that we're hosting, because I have felt it, lived it, and then I see it every single day in America and in Utah, and also where I travel and have the privilege to represent our nation. Education, job security, the economy, of course, homelessness, which we didn't get a chance to talk to a lot or talk about a lot today. Those aren't people that should just be judged as weak or evil or lawbreakers. So many of them are great people. And certainly there are cartels that exploit the homeless problem, and they're criminals, but the vast majority of them are good people who are sick and need our help. And if we can figure out ways to get them not just into transitional homes, but long-term, get them trained. They want to work. They ought to work. They ought to be self-reliant. Home ownership is a key ingredient to that piece of self-reliance. And so I'll stop, because otherwise I'll start to repeat or meander into other tangents.
Sean, thank you so much for being with us today on this podcast. Your perspective was invaluable, and it manifested itself in so many different ways to me and the listeners on why all types of shelter, rentorship, and ownership housing matters. And I think together, we are all committed to improving the state of the world by building community. So thank you.
Randy, thank you. And please keep working with government. You guys have been great partners. Please keep reaching out to our legislature and our policy enforcers at the state agencies. We do need government. We need incentives. We need ways to help people catalyze their opportunities. But we have to do that with our private sector partners. And what you're doing with MultiGreen in concert with the state of Utah and communities in Utah is a very good example. And certainly with other states in the union is an example of public-private partnerships at its best, that I believe.
Thank you so much, Sean. I look forward to having you back again and telling some of our success stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Join us as we build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. And if you like the content you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Think MultiGreen and sign up to learn more at www.multi.green.